In this video, we'll take a look at creating a winter landscape with acrylics. Now, this video is a time-lapse taken from 9 recorded 1-hour-long lessons at thevirtualinstructor.com. To learn more about how you can access this complete lesson series and become a member, just visit thevirtualinstructor.com/members. We're working on gessoed masonite for this painting, which provides a great surface for developing small intricate details like we see in this painting. Now, we've created a base tone by mixing raw umber with titanium white, and then once the surface is dry, we can create a quick sketch just using a graphite pencil, just planning out our composition. Now we're going to work from the background to the foreground in this painting, and that allows us to develop the sky completely and then move on to the middle ground and then lastly the foreground, and it prevents us from having to go back and do any negative painting around the elements in the foreground, which would lead to some inconsistencies in color. At this early stage, we're just basically planning out the shapes of the clouds. We're adding a few variations in the values. We're using a mixture of titanium white, dioxazine purple, and a bit of Payne's gray for some of the darker values. As we work, we'll progressively push the range of value, which will increase the contrast and slowly create the illusion of these clouds having a sense of volume or being three-dimensional. We're clearly painting loosely at this stage. We're trying to get as much paint on the surface as possible, and we're going to basically mold the image as we go through as we add additional colors and values. Now, the clouds aren't finished, but we're going to turn our attention to the blue bits of the sky that show through. We'll use a mixture of ultramarine and titanium white to create a lighter blue, and basically we'll negative paint. We're basically filling in the negative spaces in between the clouds with this lighter blue application. With the lighter blues in place, we can go back and define the edges of the clouds and continue working on creating that illusion of volume in the painting. So we're going to continue to add lighter values or tints on the sides of the clouds that are closest to the light source. Now, in this particular painting, the light source is originating from the upper left-hand corner, which means most of those highlights are going to exist on the left side of the clouds. You can see here as we stick with the 1/2-inch flat brush, you can still get some fairly defined edges here just by using the corner of the brush. So you don't have to necessarily reach for a smaller brush to develop some of the details that we see in the clouds. One of the wonderful things about acrylic paint is that we can easily layer colors over the top, and we can even use semi-translucent applications to gradually affect the colors that we add. Now, of course, we need to add some warmth to this painting, so we'll use a bit of cadmium yellow mixed with titanium white, and this is just a tiny touch of cadmium yellow here to warm up some of the highlights. And you can see here that that color contrasts nicely with the purples that we have in the clouds as well. Now, our clouds appear a little bit too gray and a little bit too dreary for this scene. We're bringing out a little bit more light in our painting than what's observed in the photo reference. So we're just going to put a light glaze using titanium white and again with cadmium yellow in areas to just bring out some lighter values in the clouds and make the sky appear a little bit brighter. Alright, now we're ready to move on to the middle ground, and here we have a line of distant trees. So we'll start right on the horizon line adding shapes for these distant trees. Now this is a mixture of Payne's gray and dioxazine purple. It's going to create a very, very dark purple, and we can lighten it up with just a bit of titanium white to create the illusion of distance. So as we work our way to the sections of the trees that are further away, we'll add just a touch of titanium white to make them slightly lighter. And before moving on to more of the details and more of the elements in the middle ground, we'll go ahead and start painting in some of the snow that we see on each side of the banks of the creek. We'll use titanium white here, but there's a touch of Prussian blue in the mixture just to make it feel a little bit cooler. And you'll see we'll use this Prussian blue throughout the painting to create more natural looking shadows in the snow as well. Now we're going back with another application, and we're using mostly horizontal strokes as we get further away from the viewer and more vertical strokes as we get closer to the viewer. Now we'll start adding some of the additional elements in the middle ground, and again we'll use our mixture of dioxazine purple and Payne's gray to create the shapes of some of the smaller trees that are a little bit closer to the viewer. We'll also add a few distant buildings. Of course, details are not required here, just a few shapes. And then we'll start mixing up the color for our trees in the middle ground. And this is a mixture of burnt umber. There's some dioxazine purple in there. There's a touch of burnt sienna and also Payne's gray to make the value darker. And we're going to simply use a smaller brush here, a smaller round brush, and pull strokes upward from the ground and allow those to taper as the branches get smaller. We're also going to allow some more of the light from the sky behind it to show through, more so than what we see in the photo reference, just to make our painting more interesting. Now, of course, we've mixed some water with this mixture to make the paint a little bit more fluid, to make it a little bit more easier to create these smaller strokes. Now we'll mix up some of the colors for the grass, and we'll do a little bit of experimentation here to try to find the right color. But I say the right color, but we really need to have variety in the color. So we're using burnt umber, some burnt sienna. There's also some cadmium yellow mixed in there. We're going to create a variety of different oranges and earthy browns to create the illusion of grass. And then here again, we're going to stick with our smaller brush and just pull strokes upward just as the grass grows. It's important, of course, to have variety in the color and the value here, but also variety in your brush strokes. So some of the strokes are going to be a little bit longer and some are going to be a little bit shorter, of course, to create that illusion. Now we're ready to develop some of the larger trees that are a little bit closer to the viewer. And here again, we'll use a mixture of burnt umber, dioxazine purple, and Payne's gray to paint the basic shape of the larger branches for the tree, and of course the trunks as well. Here again, we're simply just going to pull strokes upward and outward, allowing those strokes to taper as we get closer to the end of the tree. You'll notice that the branches are more concentrated as we get closer to the outer edges of the tree. Whenever you're painting trees like this, it's a good idea to include more branches than you think you should, but not quite as many as you might observe from your reference. If we include all the branches that we see, the painting, of course, might look a little bit busy. We'll add the second tree, of course, overlapping the first one that we painted here. Again, using the same process. We're just pulling strokes upward, developing the basic shape of the trunk and the larger branches, and then we can start pulling out some of those smaller branches as well. Now, of course, this process requires patience, and again, it requires adding a bit of water to your mixture so that the paint is fluid enough to create these intricate strokes. But with a little bit of patience and a little bit of water, this is an effect that you can achieve as well. Now, an added benefit here, or a clear benefit to working on the masonite, is we can create these small details. These small details are a little bit harder to achieve on traditional canvas. We can also go back with our darker mixture and make some of the applications a little bit more solid. Sometimes when you add water to the mixture, it makes it a little bit too translucent, so we can always go back and darken those applications up and make them a little bit more solid. Now, of course, our trees are three-dimensional as well. That means that they're going to have highlights on one side and shadows on the opposite side. So we'll go back in with a lighter, warmer gray and apply some highlights on the side of the tree that's closest to the light source. Again, the light source is originating from the upper left-hand corner. We can also make our shadows a little bit stronger as well to increase the contrast and increase the illusion of form as well. Now we're going to add a little bit more depth to the snow. We're going to use a stronger application of titanium white with a little bit less of the Prussian blue mixed in, just to define that snowbank. And then right behind the snowbank, we can go ahead and apply some strokes to indicate some of the grasses that are growing there as well. Again, we're using a variety of different forms of our mixture of cadmium yellow, titanium white is in there, burnt umber, and burnt sienna. We'll also add a little bit of warmth to the snowbank, again with just a touch of cadmium yellow. This is just a minuscule touch of cadmium yellow mixed with titanium white to create some of those highlights that are hitting the snowbank on the right side. Now we'll go ahead and define the edge of the creek bank on the left side and again on the right side as well. We're going to hold off on developing the actual water until the final stages of the painting, but we can go ahead and define the bank. And we'll also add a few bits where the snow is not covering up the ground and we can see some of the dirt and mud and all that good stuff underneath the snow as well. We're still using a smaller brush here, and of course we're looking at the photo reference and picking up clues here and there, but remember it doesn't have to be an exact match to your photo reference. Now we're ready to start pulling strokes out for the rest of the grass on the left side. And again, we're just using our same mixture of colors, burnt sienna, burnt umber. There's some Payne's gray in there for some of the darker values. And of course, we're going to add titanium white for some of the highlights as well. We're just going to work patiently here, and I'm using a rigger brush or a script liner brush. This is a extended round brush that gives us a lot of control in creating linear strokes. Now this brush obviously isn't very good for covering large areas, but it is excellent for creating small lines like we see in the grass on the left side. Now we'll go ahead and start addressing the water in the center, and we'll start with a darker mixture. This has a lot of burnt umber in it, and just create a darker base value for the water initially. Then we'll start adding some greens. Of course, we're going to mix this green with a little bit of viridian hue and cadmium yellow, and just start bringing some of those colors that we see in the photo reference into the painting in the water. There's also just a touch of burnt sienna in areas as well. Now this might not be the color that you would expect to see in water, but it's always a good idea just to pay attention to your reference or your subject and try to match the colors that you see. We're also going to add some darker values to indicate a few ripples closer to the viewer. And then we're ready to start working some of those highlights or those lighter reflections that happen in the water. And these are actually a lighter purple. So we'll use our dioxazine purple and use some darker versions of that and also some lighter versions of that to start painting in some of the reflections and some of the wonderful highlights that happen in the water. We'll use mostly vertical stroking for the areas of water, but you can see as we're starting to develop some of the reflections that happen from the snowbank, the strokes are going to mimic what's happening on the snowbank. Once we've got some of the midtones in place, we can continue to work some of the lighter values and just gradually add a bit more titanium white to our mixture to create those highlights. And again, just like with the tree branches, this process is a patient one. Just take your time, pay attention to your reference or your subject, and just try to mimic the shapes that you see in your reference. And usually that will lead to a realistic or representational appearance. And of course, we can continue to work those highlights and also the darker values, which we'll see in a minute. We'll go back in and create some of those darker shapes that happen in the water, and that will make those highlights feel a little bit stronger. We're also going to add some additional greens here closer to the viewer. And again, you don't have to copy your reference exactly in order to create a realistic painting. You just basically have to pick up on patterns and shapes of color and value that you see in your reference and try to include them in your painting. We'll add a few indications of some snow that has made its way down to the bottom of the bank on the left side. And then we'll refine the edge where the snowbank meets the water just by creating a slightly darker value there. Then of course some of the grass blades overlap the water, so we'll pull those up with a rigger brush, again using a variety of different values and colors. And now our acrylic painting of a winter scene is complete.